deadlift can be argued as the single best exercise for strengthening and developing the posterior chain. And although the conventional deadlift is typically what pops into most people's minds when they think of the deadlift, it's important to be aware that there's other variations that exist, such as the sumo deadlift and the trap bar deadlift. These alternatives not only slightly vary in the muscles they work and the training adaptations that they elicit, but may actually be the better option for you based on your specific anthropometry, history of injury, and mobility restrictions. But how exactly do you tell which one is best for you? Well, let's start by briefly going over how each deadlift is performed and then dive into what the differences are between them. The conventional deadlift, which is the most popular option, is characterized by a narrow foot stance with the hands placed just outside of the knees. This causes the conventional deadlift to have a more horizontal trunk angle during the setup. The sumo deadlift, a popular alternative, is characterized by a wider foot stance with the hands placed inside the knees at about shoulder width apart. This causes the sumo deadlift to have a more vertical trunk angle and therefore resembles more of a squat movement pattern than the other forms of the deadlift do. And finally, the trap bar or hex bar deadlift uses a different type of bar such that you grip the bar at your sides rather than in front of you. As a result, the trunk angle is slightly more vertical than the conventional deadlift, but more horizontal than the sumo deadlift. Now, these slight variations with each type of deadlift simply mean that one may be better suited for you depending on a variety of factors. And to figure this out, let's first take a look at the differences in the muscles worked. Given that each of these variations are still a deadlift, the main muscles worked will be quite similar, primarily the several muscles that make up the posterior chain. However, as made evident in the literature, each deadlift variation will emphasize certain muscles over others. The overall hamstrings and glute activation is actually quite similar between the three variations, but since sumo and trap bar deadlifts are more squat-like than the conventional deadlift, they will actually emphasize the quadriceps a little more as a result. And this was tested and confirmed in 2 EMG analyses, which found that these deadlift variations resulted in roughly 20% greater quadriceps activation when compared to the conventional deadlift. On the other hand, since the conventional deadlift exhibits more of a hinge pattern than the other variations do, it's going to place more emphasis on your lower back muscles, since they have to work harder to keep the back extended as the bar lifts off the floor. In fact, a biomechanical analysis by Cholwicki and colleagues has shown that spinal extension demands are roughly 10% higher in the conventional deadlift as a result. So what does this mean for you? It means that one way to pick the best deadlift is by choosing which will best work your weak points. For instance, if your squat and or quadriceps in general are relatively weak, then the trap bar or sumo deadlift may be the better option. Conversely, if your lower back muscles are relatively weak or you'd just like to develop them a little more, then the conventional deadlift might be the better option instead. But before making your decision based on that, you should first consider the lower back and mobility demands that each variation requires. The conventional deadlift will generally require the greatest mobility requirements to get into the right setup position. In addition, it will also place the most strain on the lower back. In fact, the EMG analysis I mentioned earlier found that the conventional deadlift elicits roughly 8% more shear force on the lumbar spine when compared to the sumo deadlift, mainly because the starting position is more horizontal. Now, although this isn't necessarily a bad thing, it does mean that if you've had past lower back injuries or you have trouble getting into position with the conventional deadlift, then the sumo deadlift would likely be the better option. Perhaps being the best option in this case though is the trap bar deadlift. This is because the handles on the bar used for this deadlift are typically slightly higher from the floor than a normal barbell would be. This slightly decreases the range of motion of the exercise and often makes it much easier for beginners or taller individuals to set up and execute properly. And the fact that it enables you to grip the bar from the sides and not from the front enables the load to now be closer to your center of mass, translating into less shear force on the lumbar spine and making it easier for you to keep a neutral back throughout the lift, meaning that if mobility restrictions and or past lower back injuries are a concern for you, then the trap bar deadlift is likely your best bet. But before making a final decision, let's take a look at the last factor, your training goals. Your training goals are also something you want to consider when determining which deadlift variation will best suit you. For instance, if your main goal is to build more size and overall strength, then all 3 deadlift variations are viable options to do so. Do note that research shows that the conventional deadlift has a 20 to 25% greater range of motion than the sumo deadlift and is greater than the trap bar deadlift as well, which may imply that it's better for growth, given the positive association between range of motion and hypertrophy. But in my opinion, this fact alone wouldn't be enough to say that it's superior than the other variations for muscle size. If your main goal is to improve your athleticism and to enhance your sports performance, however, then in this case, I'd say that the trap bar deadlift is the best option. This is because 3 studies have now shown that this deadlift variation involves greater force, bar speed, and peak power than the other variations, therefore making it the ideal option for athletes who often require high velocity strength and explosive power. So to conclude, here are the various factors you want to consider when choosing which deadlift is best for you. I do want to also say that it's perfectly fine to alternate between the variations or incorporate more than one of them into your training, which for some may even be the best approach. But at the same time, it's also vital that you actually try out these different variations and just find which feels most comfortable for you. Your individual anthropometry, especially your hip structure, will ultimately determine which type of deadlift best suits your body. And the only way to find this out is to get out there and experiment with it. And that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I just wanted to really quickly reiterate that, like with most exercises, there's typically not one variation that's best for everyone. Instead, it's vital that you choose the right variation based on your specific goals and also what best suits your body and your history of injury. And if you're looking for an all-in-one evidence-based program that does exactly that, such that you can see the fastest results possible but in a safe and detailed manner, then simply head on over to builtwithscience.com and take my starting point quiz I have up in order to discover which program and which approach is best for you. And as always, for those of you who haven't yet done so, I'd really appreciate a follow on Instagram. I post a lot of informative content and videos on there, so give me a follow on there, as I think a lot of you will find that useful. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, then please don't forget to support me by giving the video a thumbs up, leaving a comment down below, subscribing to my channel, and turning on notifications for my channel as well, as this all really does help me out. Thank you for all the support, everyone. I really do appreciate it. I have some really exciting content coming up, so stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.